Chapter 18 Stumbling onto a Secret. The map was drawn with a careful hand and remarkably detailed, though riddled with tiny holes. Tink recognized the dark sea of darkness, complete with little drawn sailing vessels. He saw a road that led from some cliffs to a little cluster of buildings, all neatly rendered and labeled. He bent closer to read by the yellow glow of the lantern. Frenia's flower shop, jail, and my bookstore. He realized with surprise that he was looking at a map of Glipwood, drawn by Oscar N. Retiep himself. With his finger he traced the main road toward the cliffs to the lane that led to the Igby cottage, and sure enough, there it was. It was even labeled Igby. Across the top of the map was scrawled, in the immortal words of Lachane Pastain, if anyone reads this without permission, he will be most certainly and brutally slain. Or at the very least, I'll chop off a finger or two, or three. Tink wrung his hands at his heart as his heart shriveled with fear, and the parchment started to roll shut. With trembling fingers, he smoothed it out again. Near the top of the map, at the edge of the forest, was a house labeled Ankle Jelly Manor. Over the house was a large X, and underneath it, this was written: Be you friend or be you foe, beware to all who follow. For in the catacombs below, it is hidden in the hollow. A way that leads to pain and woe, sadness, grief, and sorrow. The hungry ghost of Brimney's stoop awaits your bones to swallow. So think you long before you go exploring here tomorrow. Tink jolted as the dreadful sound of Oscar and Retiep's heavy footsteps came thudding toward him. Panicked, he rolled up the map, slipped it up his shirt sleeve, grabbed the lantern and his art books, and reached for a random book from the shelf in front of him. Mr. Retiep's round figure turned the corner and floated into the lantern light just as Tink pulled the book from its place on the shelf. Ah, young Tink, I see you've found your books. What have you got there? He squinted at the two art books and then at the third. Tink stood still as a stone, praying that Oscar wouldn't notice the funny way his shirt sleeve was bulging. The art of itching, Oscar said. Oscar read. He looked over the top of his spectacles at Tink and raised an eyebrow. Tink knew that he was caught. He wondered whether or not Mr. Retiep would actually slay him, or if he'd show mercy and merely cut off a finger. But which finger? He wondered, and what kind of instrument would the old man use? Is something wrong? Oscar asked, narrowing his eyes at Tink. You're hiding something. Tink's face went pale, and he felt as though he might faint. I understand, boy, Oscar said. It's a very private thing, and as a matter of fact, it's none of my business, is it? Oscar lowered his voice and leaned toward Tink with the hand at the side of his mouth. But if you've got an itchy rash of some sort, there are much more extensive books on the subject than the art of itching. Believe me, I've read them all. Oscar cleared his throat. If you know what I mean. Tink was so overcome with relief he could barely speak. He forced a laugh, set down the book he had just grabbed from the shelf, and with the free hand scratched at his belly and armpits. Oh, I do know what you mean, sir. Ha, 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 ha. Janner walked around the corner with three large books under his arm, frowning at Tink's odd behavior. Tink stopped scratching as Oscar turned and approved Janner's selections, and before Tink knew it, he found himself walking out of the store with his brother, map up his sleeve, thankful that he still had all 10 fingers. It was nearly dark when Janner and Tink began their short walk home, and Tink could barely contain himself. He waited just till they were an earshot away from books and crannies and blurted out, I stole a map. Janner stopped in the middle of the street. You what? I didn't mean to. It's in my sleeve right now, so I stole it. But I didn't mean to. I promise. Tink stammered and looking around. Janner stared at his brother in shock. Keep walking, make sure you don't let that thing show, and tell me what happened. They walked fast on Main Street, past the jail where a dozen fangs lurked, yet felt no fear. Tink was too excited to tell what he'd found, and Janner too absorbed by the story to notice Slarb the Fang watching them closely from the jail's porch with hatred in his eyes. Commander Norm stood behind Slarb, but he stared down the street as though waiting for something. And I just read that whoever looks at the map without permission would get their fingers cut off when I heard Oscar coming, Tink panted. There must be some kind of mistake, Janner said. Can you imagine old Mr. Reteep cutting off someone's fingers? It was Tink's turn to stop in the middle of the street. Yes, he said, eyes wide, head nodding. Well, I can't, Jenner said. He's a kind old man. You haven't seen the map, Tink said, shaking his head. When we get home, you'll see for yourself. A sudden, steady clop, clop, clop of hoofbeats and a rattle of rein and bridle stopped the Igabys, a sound that curdled their blood. A whip cracked in the dusky air, and the brothers turned to see a shadowy carriage round the bend at Dunn's Green, driven by a figure in a black robe. Janner grabbed Tink's arm, and they ran around the side of the only inn and flattened themselves against the wall. Janner closed his eyes to shut out the evil, but his head echoed with the sound of the approaching carriage. In his mind, he could see the iron bars and the pale arm of the black-robed driver swooping down to snatch him and Tink and lock them in the cage. He opened one eye to see Tink peeking around the corner. What are you doing? Janner hissed. Look, it stopped in front of the jail, Tink whispered over his shoulder. Janner stayed put. What's happening? Is it the black carriage? I can't tell. Wait, Commander Norm's talking to the driver. Janner could stand it no longer. He peeked around the corner and saw the two horses stamping the ground and snorting. The hooded driver addressed Norm, then slithered down from the seat and opened the carriage door. Jenner sighed. The door wasn't made of iron, but of dark, polished wood. No crows perched on the carriage roof or circled above. It wasn't the black carriage at all. Norm heaved himself into the coach and made himself comfortable. The door clicked shut, and with another crack of the whip, the steeds heaved. The carriage lurched forward, turned, and departed just as it had come, while the rest of the Fangs watched from the street. But not every Fang. And how is your lame little sister in that mutt of hers? A familiar voice hissed into Tink's and Jenner's ears.